Hello and welcome one and all to another episode of Early in Cyber. We're very lucky today to have a very special guest, and what better way to start off the first episode of 2024. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Dr. Jessica Barker onto today's episode.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, honestly, I've been waiting so long for this recording, and I think both myself and the listeners are going to enjoy today's conversation. So thank you for being here.
Oh, I appreciate it. And thank you for your patience with my schedule. I know it's been a while setting this up, and I'm really delighted we made it happen. Great to be speaking with you and your listeners.
Not to worry. I mean, it's not every day that you're awarded an MBE. So, yeah, I think we can forgive that one.
I'm glad it's not every day because I was so nervous.
How was the experience? Can you talk us through it? And how did you feel?
Yeah, I felt pretty overwhelmed, to be honest. I received a letter letting me know I'd been awarded the MBE by King Charles. And of course, I thought, well, actually, I'll go back a bit before that. I had an email inviting me to the royal garden party celebrating the coronation of King Charles. That's not the kind of invitation I usually get. So I thought that was phishing, of course, and we checked it out, and it was legit. So I clicked the link, and me and my husband went to the royal garden party at Buckingham Palace. 3 days later, I got a letter letting me know that I'd been awarded the MBE. So we think the garden party was like vetting that we were going to behave ourselves in public. And you get the letter and you can't tell anyone. So I had to keep it to myself. And I thought, this feels unreal. And it'll feel real when I tell people, when it becomes public. And then they publish the honours in the London Gazette, and you can then tell people. It becomes public. So then it still felt surreal. And I thought it'll become real when I go to the investiture to actually be awarded the MBE medal. So I did that a couple of weeks ago. It was at Windsor Castle. It was with the Prince of Wales, Prince William. And it still felt and still feels totally surreal. It was really overwhelming, to be honest. I was more nervous for that than I've been for anything in years. And now it feels like a very nice, surreal dream.
I mean, the thing that I really love about this story is the start where you, you thought it was a phishing email. I mean, how typical of a security individual.
Right. It's our first thought, any communication. Is this a scam? Especially if it's something good. Like if it seems too good to be true, it usually is, right?
Yep. But I'm glad that wasn't the case, and you got to meet Prince William.
Yeah, me too. And I'm glad we checked it out as well, and I didn't just delete it because I would have missed out then. But yeah, an amazing experience, and people have been so kind. I've had so many nice messages and so much support. I really appreciate it.
For sure, it was very well deserved. I think a lot of our community has seen your work, and myself included. And I think if it wasn't going to happen now, it was going to happen sooner or later.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you. It's still overwhelming for me, but I do really appreciate it.
And to sort of jump into how you got to getting an MBE, did you mind sharing with us, who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I focus on the human side of cybersecurity, and I have for the 13 years that I have been working in this industry. My background is before that point, not in cybersecurity, non-technical. So I studied sociology, politics. My PhD is in civic design. So technically engineering, but very much focusing on the people side of that. So I then was kind of working, in urban regeneration. I was interested in how the internet had sort of changed places and spaces and people and communities. And I was headhunted for a job in cybersecurity. And the firm that originally approached me, 13, 14 years ago, they were looking for someone who could take a different perspective, someone who could speak to lots of different people, translate messages, and really come at this subject, from a different field, bringing in a different angle. So I was approached, pretty out of the blue. And I immediately Googled, what is cybersecurity? Like, that's the point I was at. And at first I thought, this is really technical. I don't see how this applies to me and my interest in people. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized, of course, people are at the heart of cybersecurity. So I took the job, and I had a really steep learning curve for the first couple of years. Ever since, every day's a school day, right? But I soon just really started to love this area, and I realized more and more that, of course, we can't look at cybersecurity without people. We can't consider how to be more secure on an individual, organization, or even society and country level, of course, without thinking about awareness, behavior, and culture.
Wow, I mean, what a jump from having no knowledge in cybersecurity to diving heads in first. What would you say your biggest challenge was in that first year of diving into the cybersecurity world?
So many. Where do I start? And I feel like people can probably relate, even if you're coming from a cybersecurity degree or a computer science degree, there's so much to learn in this industry. It's so broad and it's so deep. For me, coming in, with really no background in it, and I was in a pretty much at the deep end. I had great support. But at the same time, I was working with clients from day one, learning on the job. So I was immersed in it, which was great. But there was so much to learn. For me, really getting to grips with the field as a whole, really trying to learn and understand the technical side as much as possible and as much as I needed to in my role. And also then dealing with that feeling of imposter syndrome, which when you're new is completely normal, but when you're feeling it, it doesn't feel comfortable. So there was a lot. There was a lot of learning to do. And I really just threw myself into that. So every day I would go through the day and I would ask a lot of questions, and I would keep a list of any concept, any term, any technology, any question that I needed to look into more deeply. And then every evening, I would spend hours doing research on all of that to then go in the next day and maybe have more questions from what I'd been researching, or to start that process all over again, just learning something new. So it was a steep learning curve, but I'm really grateful for that time. I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful I had the opportunity and haven't really looked back since.
For sure, I think asking questions is the right way to go about it. Myself, I work in a team of very experienced consultants who have been in the industry for over 20 years. And, sometimes, it is daunting to even want to ask a question because you don't want to feel
Yeah.
like you're the dumb one in the room, so to speak. But if you don't ask, you will never know.
Yeah.
I think our listeners can really take away that, start asking questions and keep asking questions and, following your footsteps.
Yeah, and the more you ask, the more comfortable you are with it. Sometimes, those first few times you're asking, you can feel, yeah, like you're stepping out of your comfort zone. It feels vulnerable, doesn't it, to admit you don't know something. But the more you do it, the more you realize that the world doesn't end. The more you discover actually the people who you can ask questions of. And if someone doesn't respond well, if someone does make you feel stupid, then that says a lot more about them than it does about you. because I truly believe most people in this industry want to share knowledge. And so most people will want to answer questions. And you're also, I believe you're doing a favor of the person you ask, because it can help them explain and solidify knowledge. There's no better way to learn than to teach. So it can really help. Also, with kind of organizational learning, if you're in a team and you're asking a question, chances are somebody else in the room doesn't know the answer and just didn't want to ask. So you can think of it like that as well, that actually you're providing this opportunity for other people to learn and for other people to feel comfortable asking questions too.
No, I love that advice. It's a two-way relationship, two-way street. So yeah, for sure. I think
Yeah.
everybody early in career needs to, you know, be aware that, we can ask those questions to those more senior individuals without feeling shy or worried.
Yes. And we've all been in that position. We've all been, it's why I enjoy talking about those early days, because it reminds me, and maybe others who don't know me, and see me at this position where I've just got an MBE. Well, there was a day where I was googling what is cybersecurity, and now at that point I never would have imagined that Prince William would be pinning a medal on me for my services to the industry. We all start somewhere. We all have those questions at one point in our career, and we should all have questions every day. This industry is always changing, always moving. There's always new things to learn. And I believe that's the greatest asset someone can have in cybersecurity, is that willingness, that eagerness to learn and being able to ask questions.
I love that. I love that. And who knows, we may have inspired the next generation to, work hard and pursue an MBE. So,
I hope so. I hope so. Let's do that.
and moving onwards, going back to, your uni days, you don't come from a technical background. So what, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you studied social and political studies or sciences at uni?
Yeah, that was my undergraduate degree, social and political studies, which is essentially sociology and politics. And then I did a few modules in psychology as well. So for me, it's always been about people. Ever for as long as I can remember, I've been interested in what makes people tick, what makes people behave a certain way. Why do some people feel this way and other people feel another way? Really trying to understand and have empathy as well with people. Try and understand different ways of being and living, and different ways of behaving. That's what's always been fascinating to me. And so, as I say, my first degree, social and political studies, really looking at why is society shaped in the way that it is? Why do people behave in certain ways? And what can we do to influence that positively or negatively? How can we better understand the motivation behind people? That's always been the kind of thing that's interested me. And of course, that really comes into play when we're then looking at cybersecurity, because so much of this is really about where technology meets people.
No, I can definitely see that. And it is quite interesting as well how, for social engineering, for example, the manipulation of individuals. So the human side is a huge element.
Yeah, absolutely. The social engineering, and for helping people recognize the signs, helping people be resilient to scams, also helping people process when they have been scammed. There's a huge psychological impact, and the way we respond to people can have a really big impact on how they move forward, and process. If they've been a victim of social engineering, for example. So people generally feel a level of shame internally. And research suggests that if we, say, in an organization, then shame that person further, then research shows they're actually more likely to leave their job. a year later, they are more likely to not be in that position compared to if we take a more understanding approach, and if we use more empathy with the individual, and if we look more at the root system causes rather than trying to point the finger at the one person maybe who clicked the link. So there's lots of human elements at play. And also, when it comes to organizational structure, when it comes to perceptions, the extent to which people think they can engage with cybersecurity measures, that's really the number one factor as to whether they will engage with cybersecurity behaviors. So there's loads of ways in which we can apply understanding from human-based fields and improve cybersecurity, lots of different areas.
No, I love that. Again, I'm learning so much by listening to yourself, and I wouldn't have considered, that people may leave their jobs due to a successful cybersecurity attack. So, it goes to show that there's so much more to the traditional, techie, penetration testy stuff and threat intelligence, etc. That, there is a human element, and at the end of the day, that is very important as well. So, I really love that you're shining light on this particular area of security.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. And for me, every element of the sort of technology or information life cycle is about people as much as it's about technology. From the moment that someone comes up with an idea around a piece of technology or how some information can be used, through to that technology being designed, developed, it being used, abused, it being destroyed, every element of that life cycle involves people. So, of course, there's a huge human side looking as well at who is carrying out these attacks. It's not malicious machines attacking us, not yet anyway, no matter what the headlines might be saying. There's still always people at the other side of an attack. So, actually thinking about the human element from that perspective can be really interesting too. What motivates someone to become a criminal hacker rather than an ethical hacker, for example? And then the different attack groups, we can think about what motivates them, their ways of working, their ways of operating, and to help us really understand this field. So the human element comes into play in so many different ways. And I'm really pleased that over my career, we have seen much more emphasis on the human side. It's really gone from being very niche to pretty high up on the agenda, and something that most of us are talking about, whether we are specialists in the field or people who are more technical.
Well, thank you for that, Jess. Now, you mentioned how you did a non-technical degree, but your PhD in civic design, which is, quite a different jump from social and political studies. What made you want to pursue a PhD in civic design?
Yeah, it's interesting. I can look back now and I sort of think I feel like I'm often like the fish out of water. So when I was doing my civic design PhD, again, I was in a department with people who were more technical and who were more on the engineering side, and I was very much taking like a sociologist look at civic design. But to skip back before that, I had finished my degree in social and political studies. I was working in urban regeneration, looking at social inclusion. And I started working with the local university, which was the University of Liverpool. And an opportunity came up to pursue a PhD. There was sponsorship attached, so that was very appealing. And I'd always wanted to do a PhD. So essentially, it kind of came from there. And this was an opportunity to look at the growth of the internet economy and how that had influenced places and communities. So, really looking at cities that had been based on traditional industry, so cotton mills and steel mines and things like that. And then how those places were trying to transform using the internet economy, essentially. So I found it really interesting. And it's something that had been I'd been aware of growing up. I grew up in the northeast of England. So I saw the change in the northeast when we lost the shipping industry, or, when that changed. My grandfather on my mum's side was a coal miner. My grandfather on my dad's side worked in the steel industry in Sheffield. So I was aware of this change in society and very interested in what it meant for the people who were living in those places that had been so defined by traditional industry. And then, trying to transform using the internet and knowledge-based industries. So I was really interested in the topic, and I like, apparently, bringing together kind of different fields. So civic design is all about the interplay of town planning, sociology, economics. It's kind of all about what makes a place and a space. And so there were lots of different disciplines coming together in that department, and that really appealed to me too. So it was a great opportunity, and I really enjoyed it. But as I was finishing my PhD, I was aware I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what that was. And I didn't know that it would end up being cybersecurity. So I'm very lucky that cybersecurity kind of found me and offered another opportunity for me to look at a field where lots of different disciplines come together.
I always love everybody's stories, but the one common thing that I've noticed is everybody's ended up in security somehow by accident or luck. So I absolutely love that.
It's so true. It does make it difficult when people ask, how do I get into this field? Because I'm aware I didn't take a conscious path in. I fell in, and I'm really glad I did. But it makes it hard when it's then offering advice of how to actually consciously get into the field, because that isn't the route that I took.
100%. I've had that feedback sometimes from younger individuals who
Mhm.
are interested in starting a career in security, and it's sort of typical questions: do I go down the traditional route of going to university and picking a cybersecurity related degree, or is it more, should I go do an apprenticeship in cybersecurity? There's so many different avenues, but as all the guests have shown, sometimes fate will bring you the thing that's meant for you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think sometimes it is about following what interests you and taking the opportunities when they come along, and really, noticing what you're curious about, what you're interested in, and then, making the most of that, any opportunities that come your way, and really networking with people as well, whether that's online or in person, but building up those networks can be really crucial.
100%. I've learnt so much from my network, so I think any early career individual should focus on building that network, but also building meaningful relationships as well.
Mhm. That's great advice.
Jessica, this is a question I wanted to ask. You obviously co-founded your company, Sygenta. What made you want to, become a CEO or co-founder of your own business? I know it's not an easy task, and it's no easy feat either.
Yeah, it's again, I think sometimes life makes sense as you're looking back at it. And I often think back to when I was about 5 with my brother, and we were making marzipan animals to sell to our neighbors. And that was my first venture into entrepreneurship. And then I look back and I realize a lot of my life did have little attempts at entrepreneurship. And so I've always liked working for myself. I've always liked an element of being self-directed. I think, again, the PhD fits into that. I had a lot of support, of course. I had a great supervisor, great colleagues that I worked with. But I think you don't do a PhD, you don't finish a PhD unless you are able to be self-directed to a certain extent. So I've always felt like that. I've always had a drive. I've always had a great work ethic. I've always enjoyed working. I think with cybersecurity, I was working as an independent contractor for many years. And with the human side at that point, we're going back a good few years. With the human side at that point, it was still very niche. And that was a frustration of mine. There were times where I would feel like nobody was listening to me when I was talking about the human side. The only thing that people wanted to say and hear was that people were the weakest link, and that's something that I very strongly disagree with. And so it felt frustrating at times, and it felt like I was not getting much traction. And I was frustrated with that. And I would have lots of conversations with FC, who's my business partner and also my now husband. And he felt with his specialism, obviously he's an ethical hacker in the traditional sort of digital sense, but also the physical sense as well, of breaking into buildings. And he would also have a similar frustration around the physical side. We felt like there was a lot of silo around the human, the physical, and the technical not coming together. And so that eventually led us to setting up our own company to try and bring those areas together and be a bit of a force multiplier. And Cygenta was born, and we knew it would be a lot of work. But again, I think you don't start a business fully appreciating just how much work it's going to be. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't do it. But it's great fun, and we're still really passionate about what we do, and very fortunate to have great clients, great support, to be able to do really interesting work.
I absolutely, I know I keep saying this in this podcast, but I love this story as well. Starting off in, as a little girl in Sheffield, selling marzipan to neighbours to, opening up what I would class as a global company and based in America. It's crazy. It's crazy, but, it goes to show that if you work hard and you have a dream, you can go for it. And you are the living proof for our listeners. So wherever you are, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit and you love security, you can do it as well.
Absolutely. And I would encourage people to go for it. I would encourage people to not be disheartened by the bad days or the days where people feel like people aren't listening to you. Keep going, and you learn along the way. You learn from the mistakes, you learn from the failures, you learn ways to move forward when things don't go right. So it's a great experience. And something, again, as you say, if you feel that drive, then listen to that and believe in yourself, because I never would have pictured myself in this position. I never would have pictured myself getting the MBE or doing global keynote speaking, working with some of the clients we work with. But it's amazing how things can make sense, looking backwards, and it can all seem like, okay, yeah, it did come together in the end. And actually working hard and taking opportunities that come your way, not standing in your own way, not being the one that says no to yourself, that makes a really big difference.
100%. And this is going to show my TV taste, but as in the A-Team, Hannibal says, I love it when a plan comes together. And, I love that, everything's worked out for you as well. So, things will slot into place is what I found, as long as you have the right work ethic.
Yeah, Absolutely. I think that is really key. And focusing on the bigger picture, there's always bad days in amongst that. But focusing on the bigger picture and having a sense of resilience and also being able to step away from work, giving yourself a break, giving your brain a break, can be really beneficial because this industry, I think, whatever role you're in, um, we work hard. It's an industry that keeps moving, moves at a fast pace, and particularly if you are running your own business or you're working hard on a side project, whatever it may be, you're going to be working extra hard. So taking that time out is also really crucial.
That is some great advice that myself I've begun to take as well. Find a hobby or something where you can relax and recharge and re-energize. So I think there's always not an expectation, but when you're early in career, you sort of want to climb up the ladder as quick as you can, and you want to put in those late hours, late nights. But at the same time, it is very important to look after your health and well-being, mentally and physically.
Absolutely. So well said. And the two really go hand in hand, I think, mental and physical health. But it's true, it's so easy to fall into that trap of working all the time, thinking that you have to work all the time to keep up. But it's one of those things that is actually counterproductive, and that when we take time out, as you said it so well, that being able to recharge, relax, re-energize, you then bring more back. You bring more energy back. Your brain has chance to think, you have chance to unwind, and it also creates patterns that will serve you well as you advance in your career. Because if you think to yourself, I'm just going to work really hard nonstop for the next year, I promise that will turn into 2 years, that will turn into 5 years. And then you haven't built the patterns, you haven't built the habits, you haven't built the hobbies. Whereas actually taking time out, from being early in career to take breaks, to have hobbies, that builds really good habits moving forward that will serve you well as your career advances.
Thank you for that. It sort of acts as a reassurance for all of us early in career folk that, there's nothing wrong with taking a break. It is needed and it will benefit you in the long run. So, thank you for reaffirming that point.
Of course, and anyone who has your best interests at heart will agree. Um, yes, of course, you should be working hard and having a good work ethic, but that needs to be balanced with time out, with looking after yourself, both mentally and physically. And those around you should agree and support and should be doing the same themselves. And again, I would say, anyone with your best interests and who understands the importance of that personal resilience will agree and will support you in doing that.
100%. I guess it's always key to have the right people around you who will push you, but also support you and motivate you, not just keep asking of things from you. So it's very important to look for that supportive environment to work in.
Yeah, I agree.
Moving on, our lovely listeners have sent in some questions for yourself, Jess, and I was hoping that I could run through them with you. So, in no particular order, I'm going to kick it off with the first question. So, how did you find writing your first book, which is Confident Cybersecurity, and how did you go about choosing the key topics mentioned in it?
I love this question. It harks back to what I was saying earlier. I really wrote Confident Cybersecurity for me like 10 years previous. At the time I was writing it, I was thinking of myself 10 years earlier, starting out in the industry, trying to learn every day. And so I was thinking about what book would I have liked at that point in my career. And that's what I really focused on. And I also wanted the book to be helpful to, board members who I work with. So I had them in mind of what would be a kind of briefing document in a book that might help them, people who are thinking about a career in cybersecurity, what would give them a really good overview. So that's what I was led by. And I wanted to represent all areas of the industry as much as possible in one book. So I really wanted to focus on the human, the technical, and the physical sides, and to bring it to life with lots of case studies. I'm a big believer in storytelling. And in cybersecurity, we have so many interesting stories to tell that I think bring this subject to life for people. And then that was the approach I took with the book that I have just finished writing. It's going to be out in April 2024. That's called Hacked: The Secrets Behind Cyber Attacks. And that's basically the idea behind it, was to tell the stories of cybersecurity, to interview lots of different experts and victim advocates, and even a cyber fraudster, convicted cyber fraudster, to really talk about these different attacks and different threats in cybersecurity through the lens of all of the stories that are out there.
I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on the next book that's coming out. So, I think our listeners will be keen to read that as well. After the first amazing book, the second one will be equally as awesome.
I hope so. I can't wait to hear what people think of it. It's that like second album nerves, not that I'm comparing myself to like the Beatles, but I really throw myself into writing. So it was the same with Confident Cybersecurity, the same with Hacked. I really immerse myself in it, and to be honest, become pretty obsessed with it. I still keep my hobbies going. I still go horse riding and go out for my walks and stuff like that. But I'm thinking about the book the whole time. I had dreams, lots of dreams about this book. So I hope people enjoy it. I hope people find value from it. And I'm really grateful for the support I had with Confident Cybersecurity as well. There's nothing more rewarding than hearing from someone who tells me it helped them. It's amazing to still get those messages. It means
No,
so
it's
much
it's a
to me.
very good book. So, for those of you who, can't wait for the second book to be released, feel free to check it out on Amazon. Moving on to the second question sent in by another one of our listeners. What would you say is the most useful ability for anyone looking to further their career and network in the cybersecurity space?
We've already spoken about one of the most important things, which is that willingness to learn, balanced with, the taking breaks and looking after yourself. For me, next up or equal with that is compassionate empathy. Really being able to put yourself in other people's shoes serves you so well in cybersecurity and will make you a much more well-rounded professional. And you can also apply it to yourself, applying empathy to yourself, knowing when you need to take that time out. But empathy is really understanding where someone is coming from, why they feel or act as they do, and being able to help them, as much as possible. It's not about taking on their stress or their upset, but it's about being able to see it and support and help if you can. And people can think that empathy is something you're either born with, you either have or you don't, but you can learn empathy. And one of the best ways to learn empathy is by asking questions, by actively listening to people and not judging the answer. So, for example, if you're, talking to people, it could be in your home life, it could be at work, about passwords, and they're all telling you they use terrible passwords. They all write them on post-it notes and they leave them under their keyboard in the office or whatever. As a security professional, our instinct might be to be horrified, to judge, to want to pull our hair out. But we can lean into empathy by trying to understand why. Why, when people know, for example, the value of good passwords and of keeping them secure, why do people behave sometimes in the opposite way? And if you really want to understand that why, that's where you start to build empathy and start to put yourself in their shoes and then start to think about solutions that could work for them. And I think empathy is one of the most underrated but important skills in cybersecurity. And it's something I would encourage everyone to think about and learn more about, because it really will help you and help others around you.
For sure. I love the mention of empathy. It just reminds me of finding out one of my friend's passwords, who was just sharing it with me, which is obviously a big no-no. But I'm not going to mention what his password was, but it was very similar to ABC123, and I was sort of looking at him like, "Are you serious?" And he was like, "Yes." And it's sort of understanding why people choose those passwords, and I love you mentioning have empathy, and for all those listeners who are curious why he chose that password, he said it's that simplistic, nobody will want to try it. And I was looking at him like, it doesn't work like that, but okay.
But that tells us so much, doesn't it, about some of the myths that are out there about cybersecurity. And, if you had just sort of been horrified and told your friend off, and then you might not have got that answer out of them. But because you were interested in why have you got such a bad password, you were able to learn that was the logic behind it. There was a logic. It might not be a logic we agree with, and it might not be one that is actually true in the real world with our knowledge, but still, it gives you then having empathy and understanding the why gives you an opportunity to then educate and support and help that individual. And we can take that approach forward in cybersecurity to have a much bigger impact than if we just try and tell people off, or give them the advice without putting ourselves in their shoes and understanding, does it apply to them? Do they think it's relevant? Do they feel capable and confident with what I'm telling them?
100%. And I think when we're immersed in this cybersecurity sort of bubble that we have in our careers, we forget that there are many individuals outside of the cybersecurity space that have no technical knowledge, that are unaware of the potential risks. So I guess it's our job as security consultants, leaders, business owners, to sort of educate people, but in a way that people don't feel like you're judging them.
Yeah, so well said. The curse of knowledge is something I think in cybersecurity we have to fight every day, because what we know can be so far away from what somebody who is not in security, not technical, not immersed in this field, what they know. There can be a big gap in that. And we need to constantly sense check what we're communicating, and what the level of understanding is with the person we're communicating with, without patronizing them. So it's a hard balance to strike, but it's really worth it when we get there. And empathy is the way that we can achieve that.
100%. Thank you. Now, moving on to the next question. So, often we see a lot of coverage from the technical side of cyber, whereas the human and policy side of cyber tends to take a back seat in many conversations. In your experience, how do you make these sections gain equal exposure and the crucial attention they deserve?
This is a challenge, and this has been a challenge the whole time I've been in the industry. Really, the technical side has always dominated, but we are seeing more attention, more discussion around the human and the policy sides. And I think that's because people understand that the technical domain doesn't exist on its own. Of course, there's always people, and policy and process is absolutely fundamental. And how I help illustrate it is usually with stories, with examples, by helping people understand and bringing to life those human elements of it. So, for example, if I'm talking to a board about, incident response and being prepared for an incident, and say we're talking about ransomware, they could feel like, well, ransomware, of course, is technical. And of course it is, but I will draw out all the ways in which the human side plays into that in terms of, our response. How do we communicate with each other if the network's down and our usual ways of communicating are taken out? What are the legal ramifications and the ramifications around regulation of what we need to communicate when to who? Depending on the data that's at play, and the incident that we've experienced, what do we need to communicate internally? Is there going to be personal data of staff members caught up in this? And how are we going to communicate internally? What are we going to communicate externally? When do we bring in, PR, communication, legal specialists? So you can run through an incident and really bring out, okay, it may be down to malicious code, but there's a whole host of human policy procedural elements tied up in that. With ransomware, do you pay the ransom or not? You can get into the legal and, of course, the ethical ramifications around that, and help people see that there are so many more layers to this. And then again, with storytelling in general, I always challenge people to tell me of an incident that doesn't involve people. Can anyone tell me of any cyber attack or data breach where people are not involved in one way or another? And it's a really interesting thought experiment to play. I've asked this question in conferences before, and held up a prize of like a chocolate bar or a copy of my book. And it's very rare that people can come up with anything. I think there's only one answer where actually you can argue people aren't involved. But otherwise, 99% of cyber attacks or incidents involve people.
100%. I think people are at the epicenter of everything we do in cyber. So, why shouldn't we look at the human side and understand that?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. So, moving on to the next question. What do you wish you had known when you were just starting your career in cybersecurity? And what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think a key element, as we sort of spoke about, is that it's okay not to know. Um, you are not expected to know everything. You are not expected to have expertise in all these different areas and to the depth of maybe some of your colleagues around you. That when you're early in career, you are learning. That's not to say you don't have expertise or you don't have value. You can't bring opinions and experience to the table, because you absolutely can. But at the same time, it's understood that you're still learning, and that's absolutely fine. It is fine to ask questions, to not know the answer, to go away and check, to go away and speak to people and find out more. So really embrace that, and really don't question yourself or worry that you don't know enough, or worry that everybody knows more than you. To be honest, you're going to feel like that a lot of days in cybersecurity, no matter what level you are at, because this field is so broad and so deep. There's so many different areas of expertise. So becoming comfortable with actually not immediately knowing all the answers is something that will serve you really well in your career as you move forward.
100%. I think everybody has specialties, and, you know, everybody will have strong No, everybody will have strengths and weaknesses, and it's all about how do we, help one another become stronger together.
So well said. Completely agree.
Now, moving on to the second to last question. What are some emerging areas within cybersecurity that early in career professionals should pay particular attention to for future career growth?
I think if you're thinking about future career growth, you're thinking about what you want to specialize in. My first advice, to be honest, is to follow your nose. Follow what you're curious about, what you're naturally interested in, because you're going to be working hard. So you're going to want to enjoy it. And that's going to make a difference. But at the same time, I think there are areas of growth. AI is an obvious one. But absolutely, it's already had a huge impact on cybersecurity, and I think that's only going to continue. I would say cloud security, a big area um, that has grown and will continue to grow, and where skills are in demand. And the human side. We've seen a huge change in the human side from there being very, very, very few roles, in the private sector on the human side when I started out to now it being common for large organizations to have not just one individual, who's looking at security awareness, behavior, and culture, but a team. Some of the organizations I work with have a team of like 6, 7, 8 people working on security culture in their organization. And there's really interesting roles opening up. So I think those are 3 areas that I would be looking at and really seeing what drives you, what interests you, where do you find yourself curious and asking questions and wanting to learn more.
Thank you for that. And I think that that's a key message at the end that you mentioned there. Just you need to find something that interests you and you're genuinely passionate about. So every day, doesn't feel like a work day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to finish off, we have one last question. How can I find mentorship opportunities within the cybersecurity community? And how valuable has mentorship been in your career?
I would say lots of people probably feel differently about mentorship. So this answer is going to differ, depending on who you speak to. I would say focus on networking. And to your earlier point, I love the way you said about meaningful relationships, which is so crucial. Focus on networking, building up meaningful relationships, authentic connections with people. And I wouldn't personally be saying jump straight to trying to find a mentor, asking everybody that you connect with if they will be a mentor to you. I think it's mentorship is something that is best when it grows organically. um, Unless it's a kind of coaching role and you find a coach and you're able to kind of engage them and work in a specific capacity. But I've always found, for me personally, that mentorship works best when it is someone who inspires me, or maybe I inspire them, and we're able to exchange some information and have a connection that is authentic. So that's the way it's worked for me. I would say focus on networking and learning and building up meaningful connections first. And then you might find that mentorship can come in different ways from different people at different times. That's what's worked best for me. I know other people who have different experiences, but my advice would be to focus on the networking angle first and then see what follows.
Thank you for that. And that is all the questions that were sent in. So thank you to our listeners for sending in those questions. And I hope that Jessica's advice has helped you out there.
Great questions. And I hope so too. Thanks for the questions, everyone.
And I guess, sadly, this podcast is coming to an end. I've loved having Jessica on as a guest. And, thank you so much for being on the first episode of 2024. And it's been an awesome conversation. And I really mean that. So thank you.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and a real treat for me to be kicking off 2024 of the Early in Cyber podcast. So thank you so much for the invitation and the great questions and conversation.
Thank you once again. And to our listeners, stay tuned for our next episode where we will be having more awesome guests. Until then, take care of yourself and see you soon. Early in Cyber, where knowledge meets inspiration.